dollars in the state capital to operate in that way, and it allows me to build relationships even with very unlikely colleagues. Because there are situations where we'll work on bills together, right? We'll work on projects together, but then we're going to debate aggressively on others. So it is this really kind of awkward dance at times, but it does allow us to navigate in what is an environment not built for our success.
Yeah. Wow. So many ways to go here. So I guess I want to start with combined tax. What was it?
Combined reporting?
We're talking about combined reporting.
Ooh, this is a nerdy interview. I am really excited. Wait, pause. You are the first person who's interviewed me who's ever just been like, let's talk about combined reporting. I'm not even kidding.
Really?
No one. No, I will host press conferences on this issue and no reporters will come.
Really?
Yeah, it's so frustrating.
Yeah, so in my research, I was like reading your op-eds, and I read the one on combined. I was like, I had no idea this was a thing.
Let's talk about it.
I'm obsessed.
No, I want to know.
Girls, like, tell me everything.
Yeah, hold on.
Yeah, so here, I mean, you could probably speak to it when you're and I can. I know it's about the just the way that taxes reported. You can either do it separately or combined.
Yeah.
That's very in the title, so I didn't really say much. But I think Anna.
You're doing great. So a lot of times when we talk about corporate tax policy, we talk about it from the federal perspective, right? Because we have, at the end of the day, there definitely is a nationalization of our politics where we're much more familiar with federal issues than we are as a state. So combined reporting is a state-by-state tax policy. Long story short, you have large multi-state and multinational corporations who essentially hide their revenue in shell companies. So I'll give you an example as a visual. So let's just say that I start a company and it's called Esca Madness, and we make these really popular tumblers, okay? So I made $1 million in Florida. I sold tumblers where I made $1 million in profit in Florida. That's potentially going to be taxable income, right? With the corporate income tax rate in Florida, which is very low. It's only like 5.5%. However, in order to reduce my tax liability, the logos for my tumbler are actually owned by a separate LLC in Delaware called Anna Inc. And so Anna Inc. charged me $250,000 to use my logo, to use trademarks. So now I can tell the state of Florida I actually only made $750,000, not $1 million. So I'm only taxed on that reduced income, even though I just invoiced myself for it. And the reason why Delaware, is this bastion of this kind of tax dodgy behavior is because Delaware has a very low income for income tax for corporations, but they have different types of registration fees for LLCs. So Delaware actually, they benefit because the more corporations that form in Delaware, that's income for them. So they perpetuate this structure. And so across the state of Florida, you have these large corporations who play this game. It's technically legal to do so. And then they end up really hiding their money and not paying what they owe, which means the rest of us pick up the loss, right? Like that means that Florida will continue to have a very regressive tax structure where the consumer is going to balance this budget and not corporations who are not only hiding their revenue just in many cases, but also, of course, using our water, using our roads, right? They're using a lot of infrastructure that they should help pay for, and many of them don't have to because they find these loopholes. And so I've always been advocating to close those loopholes, not to raise taxes, but just to make sure they're paying what they owe. The rest of us do that, right? So that's the philosophy behind it. It actually has Republican support in other states, but it's been a hard one in Florida to get through.
Do you think the hard part about kind of finding this money that's in Delaware is that we don't know where Delaware is? That could be the issue. Like I'm trying to think, where is
it's a tiny little state. It's a tiny little state.
It's about the size of my pinky, right?
So actually, I want to go there later.
Well, so what we're asking here that these corporations, when they're reporting on their income, they report on one sheet basically every single state combined that they have a company at. So then there's a traceability within where.
So auditors know.
Okay.
Yeah, and so when you're talking about you know, a lot of folks know the IRS, right? But in Florida, the entity that does state taxes is DOR, Department of Revenue. And so DOR would then have the information they need to assess what is your actual liable income versus you being able to hide it. And none of this information, by the way, is publicly available. Corporate income tax information in Florida is protected. And so we actually can't even, like, an average person can't look to see and audit themselves. So a lot of this is done in secrecy, and whenever DOR might detect something by chance, they figure something out, the only way that we the public knows is if there's a lawsuit, and typically these companies will settle because they don't want to disclose their information. So they might pay the state like some sort of fine for breaking the law or hiding their taxes, whatever, and we still don't have a clear picture because they opt to hide behind a settlement. So it's really frustrating. And again, it's only a structure that large corporations can exploit. If you're a small business, you can't do this. Small businesses don't even pay a corporate income tax. Only 1% of Florida businesses pay a corporate income tax. But of course, small businesses are just, you know, struggling to make ends meet, to pay their bills on time, and they don't get the same opportunities to reduce their tax liability when it comes to the fees and fines they pay to exist as a business in their community. So it's one of those policies, like I said earlier, where you actually can't find common ground across political spectrums because it's such a straightforward concept about practicing fair taxation, right? And so I've had Republicans support it more than once, but then the Florida Chamber just like steps in and just, you know, shifts the narrative completely, and they often win in these fights because they have more resources. But yeah, it's very frustrating, but it's such good policy. And some estimate that it would generate Florida upwards of $1 billion in revenue if we close these loopholes. So what does that mean, right? That would mean pay raises for every Florida teacher. That would mean eliminating driver's licenses fees for every single Floridian. That would mean access to increased childcare services. So I often think it's so important when we talk about these numbers to operationalize it, because a lot of us don't necessarily understand what does that mean, right? If we had $1 billion in revenue, and it would really help address a lot of the everyday social challenges that we face in this,
Free pump stuff.
state.
Maybe you start free
Hey,
pump stuff.
hey.
But aren't they Publix taking advantage of?
Oh, Publix is one of those.
So maybe,
Don't get me started on Publix. Publix and Universal Studios specifically, they benefit from this tax program called the Urban High Crime Tax Break. That is a program that is supposed to be designed to create high-paying jobs in areas of high crime. And the two largest beneficiaries of it is Publix and Universal Studios. And it's so frustrating because neither one of them are like creating these high-paying jobs.
Yes.
And yet they are the ones who benefit from it.
Oh, you know what? I've heard about this before, and there's also design, right, to keep them here.
Yeah.
And
Well, and the reality is that's the argument, right? It's like you have these incentive programs, and those who support them will say, well, if we don't have them, these companies won't be here. And I'm like, Universal Studios is not going anywhere. Publix is not going anywhere. And so oftentimes those arguments, they don't really like hold, you know, they don't hold a lot of truth, but they do use that fear as like a tactic to maintain them.
It's so crazy how a lot of these like hot button issues are actually, hey, can we just organize our work a little bit better?
Right.
Can we write things down on paper?
Yeah.
Right, 100%. But to your point, like these are not the topics that get the most traction. Definitely not on social media. Like I was mentioning earlier, when I talk about tax policy, it never gets the same attention as talking about, you know, an issue that's more so-called controversial, right? And so that is frustrating for me too, because I find that a lot of our everyday social challenges are tied to revenue. Like, where's the money for affordable housing? Where's the money for better teacher pay? Where's the money for public transportation? And if you close these loopholes, right, if we're willing to engage in tax policy, we can address a lot of these economic challenges. But because it's more complicated, more wonky, and doesn't get as much media attention, a lot of reporters don't understand it, it gets sidelined, and all the attention goes to these other very important issues. Don't get me wrong, like I worked at Planned Parenthood, abortion rights are a huge issue for me. But I also realized that if you solve the economic challenges that families face, you can just address things like unexpected pregnancies or access to healthcare, right? So it's kind of like this catch-22 a little bit, because I think you have to fight all these issues at once, but it is challenging because I do find that the core root problem of our challenges is economics, and the distractions away from it help maintain the class divide.
Yeah.
And so that's always something I grapple with. It's like, how can I make these economic issues more palpable for people so they're engaged more than everything else?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because you look at, like, especially like the political discourse, like, nationally is all about more social issues, right? Or even like abortion has become, it is very much a social issue, but it's very much a healthcare issue. And I think
and a freedom issue too,
freedom
right?
issue, right?
Yeah, self-determination.
Yeah, and also it's mainly a partisan issue. I feel like most people are in support of abortion, but somehow
100%.
Yeah, the narrative.
It's only partisan those who want it to be partisan.
Yeah.
And in this community, I mean, almost every woman I talk to, regardless of generation or political affiliation, agrees that this is a personal medical decision, that politicians don't belong, which gives me so much hope for Amendment 4, which is our effort to codify reproductive freedom in Florida. Amendment 4, vote yes on Amendment 4. But with that said, those who paint it as extreme are the extremists themselves, and they're not the majority, yet they have, of course, found a way through 50 years of their own organizing to take over our courts and to be the majority in these places of power, but they're not the majority on the ground in our communities.
I feel like they're just very vocal, right? It's the squeaky wheel, and then they get the grease, when really most people are reasonable.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, they've also at the same time created a lot of stigma around these issues. So yes, they are much more aggressive and vocal, but they've also kind of shamed those of us that maybe have had an abortion or support abortion from being as vocal. So it's very insidious, right? Because it's like, they emphasize their own speech, but then they shame other people's speech.
Yeah.
And I mean, same thing with like Black Lives Matter, right? Like there's this intentional effort to demonize the cause for racial equality. And so it's just so insidious. Like it's so intentional to like take our language, our messaging and demonize it while perpetuating theirs as if it's true or as if it's more righteous. And obviously it's not the case, but that's the narrative they try to always kind of build around us.
It is weird how organized they are as far as, I watched a video of one conference, them saying how they're going to take critical race theory and turn that terminology into a sword.
Yeah.
Which actually I think that was our shield at first. Like, hey, this is just critical race theory, we're just teaching about this. That was like our shield of how we're gonna educate people, and they kind of flipped it and made it a sword, like, they're doing CRT, and that became the buzzword, or woke, right?
Yes.
DeSantis has taken that and
weaponized it.
Yes.
Yeah, 100%. And again, so much of this is designed to further divide us, but also deflect from the real problems. Going back to economics, right? The reality is that we do have racial inequalities in this country. They're 100% grounded in our history. There is systemic reasons why we see poverty statistics the way they are, why our geography looks the way that it does. Like, none of that's by chance, but by denying that, then you don't have to ever address it.
Yeah.
So they're very, very effective at that, and that's why the state of Florida doesn't even want to collect certain mental health data from students anymore. Like, I wonder why we don't want to ask students, questions about their mental health as it intersects with sexual orientation, gender identity. Is it because you want to pretend like your laws aren't making it harder for students to be themselves? Like, so it's frustrating because they eliminate the policy protections and then also erase the data collection, and so they basically just kind of keep their head in the sand and pretend like there is no problem. Yet we see the challenges every day in their life.
I mean, the reporting, that's such a huge issue, especially in Florida. I remember with COVID, how they reported the deaths. It was so wonky to say, hey, our no mask policy works because if you had COVID but also had like high blood pressure, it was actually like a high blood pressure death. Like, the way they manipulate numbers to then speak to policy.
And then they just stopped. They just stopped sharing data. I mean, it was just like flip the switch. There's no data, and even right now, COVID is up, and no one talks about it anymore, even though like people are still being impacted by it. So
Noah Lyles just won the
Right.
interview with COVID. I'm
That's
like,
right.
finally, it's like a international story.
Right.
COVID is back.
Totally.
But then he won, so it's like, oh, how bad is it? I guess people are gonna start.
Well, and it definitely speaks to just the advancement of science and helping us navigate these types of health crises. But a part of that's also trusting data, trusting science, letting experts be experts. And there has been this trend, and this started way before, Governor DeSantis. There's always been this trend towards kind of demonizing academics, demonizing experts, kind of handpicking your data. So unfortunately, that's been an old too familiar trend in politics. Politicians like to pick out the numbers that serve their interests and not look at the whole picture.
But if we fix everything, then no one will vote for me.
You have a point, right? Like so many politicians, their entire career is based on conflict, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think immigration, and I don't want to go down the rabbit holes here, but another issue that has really polarized the nation is immigration, and there have been so many opportunities to address what is a broken system. Marco Rubio, when U.S. Senator right here in Florida, maybe a decade ago, he was part of this gang of, I think it was a gang of 7 who had bipartisan solutions to pass immigration reform, and all that dissipated because they realized that, hey, we actually fixed this problem. What are we going to campaign on anymore?
Mm-hmm.
And so I definitely agree with you. I mean, I get so many fundraising emails about conflict because it raises more money for campaigns, right? So it is really, really feeding into like human nature a little bit, but I think we have the capacity to kind of rebrand that, right? And to build a more hopeful vision for our politics, which I try to do, but I'll tell you, Florida, it can be challenging at times.
Yeah, well, let's talk about hope for a second. I like that. I'll take a step back, right? Because I feel like